Everyone credits Tobey Maguire for being the first person to play Spider-Man in live action, but that's a slight overstatement. He may be the most popular one, but there have been multiple people that played Spider-Man in the past. Donald F. Glut, Danny Seagren, and Stephen Fratus. But there's one person, well two, who should not only be recognized for starring in the first live-action Spider-Man movie, but also the first and only live-action Spider-Man show. That's right, I'm talking about 1977's Spider-Man. I'm sure most of you guys have heard or come across this show on the internet, but for most casual Spidey fans, it's a bit of lost history. You'll hear people talk more about the 60s or Toei Spider-Man than they would with this show. I didn't even know this existed till I found it randomly in high school, but since then, I have been a huge fan of this show. Although I'm a film nerd who loves reading about old filmmaking, so my opinion may not be the same as everyone else's, but that's never stopped me before. Let's take a look at the first real attempt of adapting Spider-Man in live action. Cue the intro. After the success of Spidey Super Stories, Stan Lee would sell the TV rights to CBS. CBS has a long history of broadcasting classic DC cartoons, and also have experience in the live-action realm with Shazam, The Secrets of Isis, Wonder Woman after ABC canceled it, and The Incredible Hulk. The series would be produced by Daniel R. Goodman and Charles Fries, and would be filmed in Los Angeles because it was cheaper to shoot there. During production, Stan Lee and Goodman would reportedly clash over the direction of the series. Stan felt the show was too juvenile and was making Spider-Man into a cardboard character. To gauge audience interest, a 90-minute pilot was ordered and aired on September 14, 1977. The pilot would then get an international re-release for theaters thanks to Columbia Pictures, who would later get the rights to Spider-Man in 1999. I have fond memories of watching this movie, but it has been a while since I've seen it, so let's see how Spidey's first film holds up. God, that music is good! The movie starts off with everyday normal people doing their regular jobs, until they suddenly stop and go out to rob a bank. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. There are no recognizable Spider-Man villains in this series. In fact, there's no comic book-like villains at all. Oh, come on! The show was aimed for the adult demographic, so the executives didn't think that grown-ups wanted to see villains in silly costumes, even though we did. That may seem strange with how Adam West's Batman wore colorful costumes and had wacky villains a decade prior, but that show was aimed for children and wasn't meant to be taken seriously. Another reason why this didn't happen may be due to character rights. Remember that 60s Spider-Man could only afford a couple of characters and had to create new villains for the rest of the series. Although I think the real reason why they did this is due to the budget. There was no way the show could pull off Doc Ock's moving arms or Flying Vulture. Although it would have been funny if they tried to make a Lizard episode. A majority of Spidey's villains are technically challenging to bring to life. However, I think they could have afforded a Mysterio, Electro, Scorpion, or Kraven, which would have been an awesome episode. But we'll just have to settle for whatever a 70s TV executive could think of. We cut to the Daily Bugle where we meet college photographer Peter Parker, played by Nicholas Hammett. Nicholas Hammett is a legendary actor who started when he was 11 years old on a Broadway play called A Complacent Lover in 1961, and would make his film debut 2 years later in 1963's Lord of the Flies. Over the years, he's starred in major projects like The Sound of Music, The Brady Bunch, General Hospital, and Hawaii Five-0. He was instantly selected to play Spider-Man after a CBS executive saw him performing in a play called The Importance of Being Earnest in Los Angeles. While Hammett wasn't a comic expert, he wanted to take the role seriously and not copy the campy style of Adam West's Batman. So he imagined himself in the shoes of Peter Parker, which in a way represents the idea of Spider-Man accurately. He captured the charm, intelligence, and sincerity of the character. You genuinely believe that this is a nice guy who wants to do good in the world. Sure, comic Peter at the time was a little darker and more cynical in the world, but Hammett captures the youthful spirit of the character. You know, before he went through all the trauma. However, there's two changes the show made to the character. One of them being a big mistake, which we'll get to later, and the other is him becoming Spider-Man during his college years. Which is fine, cause high school Spidey wasn't as popular as he is now. Peter is trying to afford college by selling photos, but of course J. Jonah Jameson, played by David White, wants better pictures. Robbie runs in, played by Hilly Hicks, who's a little young for the character, but still a nice inclusion, informs Jameson that someone is controlling 10 people via mind control.
I mean, that's not very realistic.
The extortionist wants $50 million, or the 10 people will persona themselves. Later at a college laboratory, Peter and this jackass are conducting a radioactive experiment, during which a random spider is exposed to the radiation and bites Peter's hand in the process. He goes outside to get some fresh air, only to be caught in the middle of a bank robbery. Despite having plenty of room to move out of the way, Peter runs into the alley and wall crawls to safety, discovering his newfound powers. Captain Barbera, played by Michael Pataki, interrogates Peter about the missing money. This guy isn't based on any recognizable captain Spider-Man has interacted with in the comics. He's just playing the basic angry cop you've seen on TV. He's not my favorite because he's always yelling at Peter. Actually, now that I think about it, he acts more like Jameson than David White does. Once he gets home, Peter decides to test out his powers and... Okay, look. It was the 70s, and insurance wouldn't let Hammett hang off of any wall. But you gotta admit, it's the good kind of cheesy effects. Peter later practices again in the parking lot and sees a local purse snatcher.
Hey you! Hold it! Hold it!
Yeah, I wouldn't react like this if I saw that. News of this Spider-Man reaches the Bugle, and Peter decides to gaslight Jameson and Robbie about who he is.
What do you look like?
Oh, like a spider.
How many legs do you have?
Well, 2, of course. He's a man.
You just said he was a spider. Spiders have got lots of legs.
No, sir. He's like a spider. He can do the things a spider does. You know, climb walls and spin webs, and he's very, very strong.
There was no reason to do this, but I genuinely believe Peter did because Jameson wouldn't give him his $46. We cut back to Peter's home where we see Aunt May, played by the famous Jeff Donnell, sadly only appearing in this movie and was recasted later in the series. By the way, isn't there something missing here? Or maybe someone important? Like someone very important to Spidey's origin? Well, for those just listening, I'll tell you anyway. There's no Uncle Ben in this Spider-Man movie. How do you forget the one important element in Spider-Man's character? His whole motivation to becoming a superhero relies on Uncle Ben's words and death. It is a lesson he has to learn, a burden to carry. We don't get the great power comes with great responsibility speech here. He just randomly decides to become a superhero. You could say that's excusable for how kind-hearted this Peter Parker is, but it's like Bruce becoming Batman without his parents' death, or Superman not being an alien. You're missing an important part of the character. It doesn't destroy the show for me, but I'm still bothered by it. We finally see Spidey's iconic costume, and it looks great. I know in today's standard this looks goofy for some of you, but for the time, it was comic accurate. This definitely looks like something a broke college student could make, and I love it. It reminds me of the time I made my own costume to meet Stan Lee. I ordered a pre-made Spidey costume because I was 12, and puff painted the whole thing to make the web stand out. I also puff painted the little blue lines in the suit. God, that took a whole week to do. Why did I do that? It goes to show how complicated costume design can be, not just for looks, but also on a technical level. I came across a problem where the zipper cut into the back logo, and I had to be careful on not puff painting the zipper. Otherwise, I'd be stuck in it. That's why superhero suits hide the zippers in between seams and layers, in order to maintain that professional look. The two complaints that come with the suit is that the boots don't match and the mask has cat eyes. Now I would agree to this if it wasn't for the fact that this suit is used for stunts. Normally, comic Spidey wears socks since he sticks onto surfaces better without shoes. But most Spidey cosplayers will agree that only wearing socks all day is a pain in the ass. Which is why we go for shoes, or build them into the costume. The lenses are silver with holes drilled in because white lenses are the worst. I know they're the iconic look for Spidey's mask, but canonically Spider-Man's lenses is a two-way mirror, so they should actually look like this. The only reason they're white is because it's a comic book. Wearing these in real life made me blind. I literally couldn't see anything and had to be guided to Stan Lee. So imagine being a stuntman on top of a 60-story building with no visibility. Yeah, I'd be scared too. If you still think this suit sucks, then just remember that Toby's suit went through multiple versions, had to change the web line so the camera could pick up on the red, almost had black lenses, had to account for color degradation, had to be form-fitted so it wouldn't crease when moving, had a face shell which is very uncomfortable to wear, cost $50,000 and took a very long time to make. So I say that this is a good suit for the time, and nostalgic in today's standards. The Bugle gets a tip on another bank robbery, but this time the victim is conscious. As they're rushed to the hospital, their daughter Judy Tyler, played by Lisa Eilbacher, follows them along with Peter. One of the extortionist's henchmen activates a silver pin, which compels Judy's father to jump out the window.
Hurry up! Get up there! Move it!
I've talked about Nicholas Hammond and why he's great as Peter Parker, because in reality, Hammond barely wore the suit. He only wears it when Spidey's directly talking to someone or needs to unmask. For most of, if not the entire episode, the man beneath that mask is series stunt coordinator Fred Waugh. You see, actors like Paul Rudd or Chris Evans may be the face of these characters, but they aren't doing their own stunts like Jackie Chan or Tom Cruise. So for 90% of the time, the superhero you see on screen is a stunt man or woman, wearing uncomfortable costumes that may or may not protect them from the falls and bruises they get from doing this. This may sound like an obvious fact for some of you, but it's an easy one that most people forget. Thankfully, by today's standards, we have a better understanding and appreciation for these brave souls. But if you ever talk to anyone about this show, they don't mention Fred Waugh. So let's right that wrong by giving him the credit he deserves. Fred is a former trapeze artist who has been credited on 92 stunts. After this show, he worked on Batman and Robin, Minority Report, and Beetlejuice. The stuff Fred has to do for the show is not easy. He's climbing real buildings without any gear and is only supported by invisible wires. He has to film these first-person shots with a 60mm camera that he strapped onto a football helmet, which weighed 50 pounds. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Fred had to do this multiple times. They could have just built sets or green screening like we see here, but they wanted to make the wall crawling look real, and this was the only way possible. And also the cheapest too. Since Spidey only talks when Hammond is wearing the suit, he'll mostly be silent when Fred is playing him. And since Fred is also an actor, he made sure to portray Spidey's movements in a unique way, from the way he stands, moves, and fights. No other Spider-Man moves like this, which makes Fred's performance all the more special. And here's a fun fact. Apparently Fred was good friends with Jeannie Epper, the stunt double for Wonder Woman. And since both shows were shot on the same lot, the two hung out with each other while wearing their respective costumes. Spidey saves Judy's dad, but didn't get any pictures and is still $46 short. Luckily, Judy covers him, but begs Peter to help her by visiting the guru her dad was seeing. This is Edward Byron, played by Thayer David, who's the one behind all the mind controlling. Now I know he doesn't look like an exciting villain, but the idea of a mind controlling villain could be interesting. We've seen what Mr. Negative can do to people, so maybe
I'm gonna stop you right there, bud.
we later see Peter finally creating his web shooters. And they look great! Sure, the webbing is obviously rope, and yes, the web shooters look big and clunky, but that's how they're supposed to be. Peter also discovers a weird signal on his oscilloscope. He suits up and follows the signal back to Byron, only to be stopped by mind-controlled martial artists. I know it's cheesy, but I love this. Feeling overwhelmed, Spidey web slings to safety. And by that I mean Fred actually swung from one building to another. What the fuck? Only crazy people do this. Peter will try multiple times to figure out how Byron is controlling people, only to get injured and mind-controlled himself. He's not the most efficient Spider-Man, but he eventually gets the job done. Just when Byron is close to receiving the city's money, Captain Barbera calls his bluff and arrests his henchmen. Byron retaliates by activating the signal to kill the mind-controlled hostages. Multiple people, including Judy and Peter, are about to persona themselves. But by pure luck, Peter's pin falls off and he's able to destroy the satellite that was controlling the hostages. Byron is somehow mind-controlled by the machine malfunctioning, so Spidey nicely suggests he turns himself in. Byron's lucky he was talking to him and not Freeland. The day is saved, Captain Barbera takes the credit, and Peter finally gives Jonah some newsworthy photos.
It's incredible. How come you're the only one who's able to get pictures of him?
Simple. I believe.
And that was the 1977 Spider-Man pilot. Sure, it was slowly paced, even for the 70s, and the plot was very light. However, I can't help but love their attempt at bringing Spider-Man to life. It's the kind of film you have to appreciate for the time it came out, and not care about the plot. The pilot was able to garner a 17.8 rating with a dirty share, CBS's highest rating for the entire year. However, it didn't quite reach its intended demographic, as children watched the pilot more than adults did. CBS would pick up the series for a limited 5-episode season. They had to recast a few characters, along with creating new ones. The budget was still as low as ever, so each episode only had 7 days to film. That's why there are a lot more scenes with Peter, because those were much easier to make. Thankfully, the show avoids the problem that 60 Spider-Man had, as they only reused the pilot footage when Spidey is moving throughout the city. With that in mind, let's take a look at the first 2 episodes of Season 1, The Deadly Dust, which was re-released internationally as Spider-Man Strikes Back. We open with Spidey saving a woman from jumping out of her apartment. As you notice, there are some minor changes made to the suit. The mask has proper silver lenses, which is a massive improvement from the previous ones. Spidey now sports a clunky web shooter on his right hand, and wears a utility belt. Back at the Bugle, we notice some of the subtle changes. Robbie is gone and replaced by Rita. who's played by famous singer and actress Chip Fields. I'm guessing Rita is based off of Glory Grant, Jameson's secretary after Betty Brant moved on from that position. Speaking of, Jameson is now played by Robert F. Simon, because according to Hammett, David White left due to a possible nervous breakdown. It's nothing against David, but I like Robert's version of Jameson more. He portrays that aggressive anger perfectly, but does so in a serious tone compared to the comedic tone we're so used to.
Parker, you have a job with this paper as a part-time photographer because it's always been my policy to help students who are working their way through college. Thanks to you, I am seriously considering changing that policy.
And I'll get right on it, but to do it right, I will need one thing.
Of course, your every request is my command.
All I need is a car from the motor pool so I can get from the
A car? You want a car, that's all?
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I was afraid you wouldn't understand.
Oh, of course I understand. Parker, did you know that for the first 10 years that I ran this paper, I rode the subway to and from work every day in all kinds of weather?
No, sir, I didn't know that.
I think it did me a lot of good, just as I think it's going to do you a lot of good.
Does that mean I don't get the car?
Parker, you'll get a car from me the day that the Statue of Liberty roller skates down Fifth Avenue.
As the series goes on, he'll tone down the anger and start to act like a reasonable boss. But I actually don't mind that because Robert also captures Jameson's secret soft spot that he has for his employees. Meanwhile, at Peter's college, his professor announces that he's going to conduct an experiment with plutonium. Plutonium is a dangerous element that some universities are still using today. While the argument of nuclear energy being too dangerous is still topical, I can understand the concerns these students have. Later that day, Peter is introduced to Gail Hoffman, a Miami reporter who wants to interview Spider-Man. Gail is played by Jonah Cameron, who was Isis in that aforementioned Secret of Isis show. During production, the running joke was that this was a secret Spider-Man and Isis crossover. Actually, that would have been awesome. While interviewing Peter at his college, his spider sense goes off and warns him that the plutonium is being stolen. So remember those 3 concerned students from earlier? Well, in order to show the university how easy it is to steal the plutonium, they decide to do it themselves. I know there's a lot of bad examples of protesting, but this has gotta be the stupidest one. What are a bunch of college students going to do with 10 pounds of plutonium? I'll give them this. They did prove how easy it was. The next day, the 3 Stooges are annoyed by the university's lackluster response.
They're turning this thing into a joke.
We'll see how long they last. You mean we're gonna go through with it? It's the only way we can make our point. We have to build a bomb.
Do I need to go on a rant on why this is a stupid idea? F it, I will anyways. Why the hell do you want to build a bomb? First off, you clearly don't have enough protection from the radiation, so everyone in this building will die from cancer. Secondly, you already proved your original point. What purpose does it serve to build a bomb now?
Look, if we're gonna do this thing, we need to see things through.
You mean we're gonna go through with it?
I'm gonna see how far I can go.
We're then introduced to our James Bond villain, Mr. White, who reads about the missing plutonium and wants to use it for his own desires. He suspects that Peter has the plutonium, which leads to Mr. White trying to kidnap him. During this, the idiots finish making the bomb, but one of them gets radiation poisoning. Boy, who could have seen that coming? Once Peter finds out, he rightfully chews them out and asks where the bomb is. Unfortunately, one of Mr. White's henchmen hears this and beats him to the bomb's location, which means Spidey has to fight another martial artist. Mr. White manages to steal the nuclear bomb, but luckily Spidey stuck a spider tracer on the limousine. Peter knows where the plutonium is, but can't get there without the Bugle funding it, which means Jameson, Gale, and Peter all travel to Los Angeles.
That'll be $2, please.
$2 for a glass of orange juice?
And for service with a smile.
The gang finds a limo and tries to chase after it. I love that parts of the car they're using are falling off during these tight turns. I'm too young to tell if this was a bad car they were using or just how bad the quality of them used to be. Despite losing the car and getting separated, Peter and Gale chase the henchmen to an empty studio backlot. which leads to a good old-fashioned showdown. The bad guys still get away, but Peter and Gale refuse to give up and try to investigate on their own. But it's the 70s, so Gale gets kidnapped and we get this scene.
Very nice.
Why do I have to dress this way?
2 reasons. 1, because I like women in bikinis. And 2, I feel safer when I know there's no place for them to hide any weapons.
Take these crisps on!
Luckily, Spidey finds where she is and finally beats the henchman. God, how many times did I say that? Should I have just called them goons?
See, that's where you're wrong. Goons and henchmen are 2 completely different animals. The henchmen believe in the cause, whereas goons are just there for the paycheck.
Henchmen, guns, whatever.
Gale tells Spider-Man that Mr. White plans to blow up Los Angeles during the president's speech. So with little time, Spidey decides to take a ride in a helicopter and...
Oh my goodness!
Despite the bad green screen effect, this whole scene is insane. Not only did Fred hang off of a helicopter that's thousands of feet in the air, but one of his hands was broken, so he was holding onto the rope with one hand. Jesus, this guy is crazy. Spidey successfully defuses the bomb and saves America. Mr. White escapes, vowing to run into Spider-Man in the near future.
Oh, let me guess. No, he won't.
Peter impresses Jonah with his pictures so much that he offers him to spend the rest of the week at the suites.
Well, that is really nice of you. Thank you. But, Mr. Jameson, today is Friday. There are only 2 more days left in the week.
Well, what do you want for nothing?
And that was Spider-Man Strikes Back. The pacing was slightly better, but still lacks in the story and villain department. Mr. White had no motive to blow up LA other than just wanting to. In fact, the real villains of the story were those dumb kids, which we never hear from again, so I assume they died from radiation poisoning. Now it's time to talk about the series itself, which is somehow more obscure than the 3 movies. It should be noted that the visual quality of these episodes may be harder to watch. That's because most of them haven't been remastered by fans yet, and some of them have been getting deleted from YouTube. But I'll try my best to make them visible to watch. So with that, let's check out the rest of Season 1. The statue of Rava, the Khalistan god of death, is being displayed at Peter's College Museum, but a man named Mandak demands for it to be taken down and returned to the people of Khalistan. I don't know much about Khalistan or Rava itself, so I was curious to see if this was somewhat accurate to the culture they were depicting. Well, after an hour of Googling, I learned that Khalistan is not necessarily a place, but a movement. Established in the early 1940s, the Khalistan movement seeked to create a separate homeland for the Sikhs by establishing its own ethno-religious sovereign state in the Punjab region of India. It's a whole thing, but from what I learned, there's no god of death for Khalistan. Even if we go off of Sikhism, they don't have one either. Rava can be related to many things, but if I had to guess, it could be based on Hinduism's Ravana, a demon king, or Yama, the god of death. I wasn't entirely sure I was looking up the right info, but later in the episode there's a cult called the Cult of Rava, who wants the statue so they can ignite a civil war that would grant Rava's followers political power. So maybe they are basing this off the Khalistan movement? I don't know. Clearly someone in the writing team wanted to base Rava on an actual cultural figure, but had to make changes so they wouldn't offend anyone. If that's the case, then why didn't they just adapt the Lifeline tablet? Wait, maybe they did. Believe it or not, Mandak is the only superpowered villain in the show. He has telekinetic powers, which just so happens to be the cheapest power to film, and while that sounds exciting and all, the show doesn't really take advantage of that other than moving a couple of objects around the room. Spidey doesn't even land a punch on him. He somehow defeats himself with his own power. It's an average episode, although it does have the funniest stunt of the show. The Tovad Award Committee is meeting in New York to decide the first potential American winner, one of them being Dr. Moon, a scientist that specializes in cloning. Yup, the one story the show decided to adapt from the comics is the infamous Clone Saga. Considering that the comic came out 3 years prior to this and was based on the first arc of the Clone Saga, before things got too out of hand, doesn't make this as bad as it could have been. But this is still a confusing decision because this is supposed to be a grounded Spider-Man show. If you wanted Spider-Man to fight on screen, then you should have just used Chameleon. There are some major changes they made from the comics. Instead of having Miles Warren, an evil college professor who likes to dress up as a naked Yoda, we have Dr. Moon, a nice scientist who happened to clone an evil version of himself that wants to carry out his darkest desires. At one point, Spidey accidentally cuts his hand, and the evil Dr. Moon uses it to clone Spider-Man, essentially creating Ben Reilly. Except he's never called that and is just an evil clone. Okay, that sucks, but that isn't a bad idea. Throughout the episode, we see Peter getting pushed around and deciding not to do anything about it. But a clone without his good morality and releasing his internal frustration would have been cool to see. But he's just used for a lame fight that ends with him accidentally killing himself. At least he gave us the best line read of all time.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
The only fun part of this episode was seeing Jameson in a Spider-Man suit 26 years before J.K. Simmons would, and seeing Aunt May again, who is played by Irene Tedrow, who mentions an Uncle Max, but he doesn't exist in the comics. Which makes me wonder, how many relatives does Peter have in the comics? He kinda has a sister who's also a secret agent, but that's still up in the air. Jonah is technically his cousin due to his father marrying Aunt May. May's first cousin is named Sam and Julia Riley, whose children are Amy, Amanda, and Alexa Brie. If we're gonna count clones, then Peter's had enough to make a family rabbits jealous. Although 95% of them are dead, leaving us with Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. The popular ones, Spider-Side, a clone who originally thought he was the real Peter Parker until Jackal screwed with him. Then there's Doppelganger, an evil version of Spider-Man created by Magus, an evil version of Adam Warlock. And let's not forget Webman, a non-canon clone created by Dr. Doom. God, I hate clones. The president of Tavalia, not a real place, arrives in New York to watch his daughter compete in the Miss Galaxy beauty contests. That is until she's kidnapped by the sister of the former tyrannical leader of Tavalia, who wants to use her as leverage in order to regain control of the country. The highlight of this episode is the star power we have. We got Harold Sakata, the famous Oddjob, Bob Miner from Commando, Madeline Stowe, and the villain of the episode is played by Barbara Luna. And shout out to Nicholas Hammond for finally doing a stunt. Apparently, running away from an exploding vehicle was the safest thing to do in the 70s. And that concludes Season 1 of Spider-Man. The first few episodes received a 22.8 rating with 16.6 million viewers, making it the best rated program for the week on CBS. The series was the 19th highest rated show of the 1977 to 78 season. However, CBS was becoming reluctant on giving the show a regular time slot for the 1978 to 79 season, as the series was still expensive to produce and continued to underperform with older audiences, so more changes were made. Episodes were aired infrequently throughout the season in order to compete with other shows, and production duties were handed over to Lionel Siegel, the former producer for $6 Million Man. Captain Barbera was cut and was replaced by a new character. Season 2 also tones down a lot of things. No more fantastical villains, even though we barely had any. Just guys who want to steal money. And they made Spider-Man even weaker. So, with all those changes in mind, let's see how Season 2 turned out. Peter is invited to a new high-tech security building where he runs into rival photographer Julie Masters, played by Ellen Brie. Julie is another original creation made for the show, whose sole purpose is to be a potential love interest for Peter. Unfortunately, the show doesn't do anything to develop her character. In fact, she's kind of an annoyance to everyone around her.
Hey, Peter, wait!
Oh, not now, I'm sorry.
I can't wait.
Great. Listen, we did have a date. I was supposed to meet you here.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I apologize. Something big has just come up. I'll have to make it up to you later.
Oh, yeah? Well, not good enough, friend. You're on some kind of a hot lead, right?
Back off, would you, Julie? I'm really, really in a hurry.
Look, you beat me 6 weeks from Sunday on the Colbert story. Is this connected?
I'm not kidding. I'm leaving. Why don't you do us all a big favor and go away? Stay away from here. It's too dangerous.
Look, Spider-Man, I'm very grateful for your help, but I know something is going on up at that mansion. I have to get up there.
Don't be a fool. Go away.
I know it's hard to create a new love interest for Spidey, especially when it has to compete with Gwen and MJ, but it's not an impossible task to achieve. Anyways, a couple of thieves break into the building and take everyone hostage. Basically Die Hard, although the movie came out a decade after this episode, which makes me wonder if this somehow inspired it. But Die Hard was inspired by Nothing Lasts Forever, a novel that came out in 1979, a year after this episode. This may sound crazy, but co-writer Philip Taylor's agent actually thought they stole the idea and wanted to sue 20th Century Fox. We do get some interesting characters here, who I don't remember the names of, so I'll just say the actors that play them. David Shiner is the leader and plays that role well. Not surprising considering his acting career. Fred Lerner is the guy who hangs off the scaffolding, and my god, you can actually see the fear in his eyes. Warren Vanders is here. Sorry, I didn't have much to say about his character. Todd Sussman is the guy who hacks the building computer and...
She hasn't made a sound. I asked her not to. We can do whatever we want now, and she won't make any protest ever. Yes. She's one of a kind. Beautiful, isn't she?
I'm fully cooperative, I hope. Now, you can revise the program.
Of course I can. She doesn't know how to say no to me. You see, the more sophisticated the lady, the more vulnerable she is to someone who knows her well. And we've spent a lot of time together, haven't we?
Do I need to call HR? Once again, Fred Wall is doing crazy shit like climbing up and down the building and balancing on a tightrope to disarm a bomb. Overall, not a bad episode. By only using one location, they were able to focus on the story, and the action actually felt intense to watch. Although I do like Die Hard and Spider-Man, so I'm a bit biased. The next one involves Julie being hunted by terrorists after she accidentally takes a picture of one of them during a heist. You'd think they would use this as an opportunity to develop her character, yet all she does is stand around to get kidnapped. Not as interesting as the last one, but the one saving grace is this. Holy shit! Those aren't extras, by the way. They're real people reacting to this. An imprisoned politician that Rita knows has been released from jail, promising to reform the facility and improve the lives of prisoners inside. Prisoners' rights is an intriguing topic that was covered in the comics, so it's cool to see the show tackle this as well. Though it ends up being a ruse to steal $1 million, which kinda ruins the message. The episode does a great job expanding Rita's character. She went from being a woman that kept saying she was raised on the streets to being an equal in Jameson's eyes. The bank the bad guys rob is the same location where Spidey fought those martial artists from the first movie. The prison we see is an actual prison with real prisoners on screen. Weirdly enough, this episode was combined with The Curse of Rava for the VHS release. So to bridge the gap between two different stories, they filmed a new scene with Hammond and Fields. Which they didn't have to do, but it was cool that they did. Peter is sent to the estate of a wealthy widow who claims to be visited by the ghost of her dead husband. She's told to donate all of her money to a group of men who are pretending to be paranormal investigators. This would have been more interesting if they used real ghosts like Cape Crusader did, but Spider-Man fights a bear, so I'll give it a pass. While doing a story on rare coin collection, Peter and the collector are robbed by a mysterious thief. Peter manages to take a picture, only to find out it's been replaced with one that will falsely accuse someone else. Peter refuses to turn it in, and the lieutenant, who's basically a second-rate Captain Barbera, sends him to prison. It's one of those interesting scenarios where Peter is imprisoned and struggles to fulfill his duties as Spider-Man. The common complaint of this episode is how Peter smuggled his costume into jail and sneaked in and out without anyone noticing. But my complaint is why Peter didn't hide that extra roll of film and just turn in the other ones instead. Although I guess he didn't want to lie to the police. even though he did in the past. While the coin collector is the least exciting villain to watch, the episode itself was actually good. Seeing Peter going through hell to protect one person that he doesn't even know was very accurate to the character, and seeing Peter's friends help him out was very endearing to me. It's a satisfying episode for the series. A college student named David, played by Gavin O'Hurley, hires Peter and Rita to help him develop a consciousness control drug. But they unexpectedly created a mind control gas and are controlled by... I don't even remember his name. Nor do I care to, so let's call him Dennis.
It's interesting, our thing, isn't it? To be in someone's mind, to have complete control. It's like the thrill of being near the executioner's switch. Knowing that at any moment, you could throw it. But knowing you never will. But you could. Never isn't the right word, because I could. And I might. I probably will.
Dennis is another Edward Byron, but a more effective one since his method of mind control doesn't take forever. And instead of controlling 3 martial artists, Dennis controls a literal army. However, he's not that interesting of a villain and goes down the same way Byron did. This episode was just a shorter version of the first movie. Whether that's a good or bad thing is your opinion, but rest assured you're not going to remember this episode. And that's the last of the regular episodes. The last 2 are part of a special called The Chinese Web, which was internationally released as Spider-Man The Dragon's Challenge, a much better name in my opinion. It's time to watch the final installment of the 1977 Spider-Man series. Will it end with a bang? Let's find out. An old college friend of Jonah named Min Lo Chan, played by Benson Fong, visits the Daily Bugle for an important matter. You see, Min is the Chinese Minister of Industrial Development, and he's been accused of selling information to the US government. In order to clear his name, he needs to find the 3 Marines that offered him money back in 1946. Jonah agrees to help and orders Peter to track the lost Marines. However, a wealthy industrialist named Snyder, who I originally thought was Mr. White, because that's more interesting than another rich white guy, plans to build a power plant for the Chinese government that will be worth $1 billion. But if Min is declared innocent, he'll lose the power plant contract. So he sends a highly trained assassin, just kidding, it's some guy named Clyde Evans.
I'm still suffering from jet lag.
What you need is a steam bath. Dry steam. Works for me every time.
What I need is some sleep. You guys figure out some genius plan to knock off the old guy, will you? I'm gonna take a nap.
There were multiple attempts on Min's life, but luckily Spidey's there to save him. Unfortunately, Min suffers a minor heart attack, and his niece Emily Chan, played by Rosalind Chow, blames Peter for running away when they needed him, which torments Peter on having a secret identity, and we get this moment that feels straight out of the comics.
Emily, it's only because I have to prevent anyone from knowing that I'm Spider-Man that I ran away.
You're a coward. You left us to be killed.
If only I could tell you.
I never want to see you again.
I didn't know you had a bad heart, Mr. Min. If I had known, I wouldn't have run away. I swear I wouldn't have run away.
Peter does find one of the Marines at his local college, a professor named Roderick Dent, who wants nothing to do with Min or the whole situation. But Peter won't take no for an answer.
I just thought that if you knew that a man's career, I mean his whole life, was at stake, that you might be willing to cooperate.
You thought wrong, Mr. Parker.
Now, I'm not trying to blackmail you.
Goodbye, Mr. Parker.
Wait just a minute.
You don't leave me
I happen
alone.
to know that you stole the $10,000. I also know that you killed the Chinese school teacher. I know that you were court-martialed, that you spent 2 years in jail, and that you received a dishonorable discharge.
With the other 2 Marines being unable to testify, Peter convinces Dent to help clear Min's name, which leads to them and Emily flying to Hong Kong. Unlike the second film where half of it was in LA because the show was filmed there, half of this film takes place entirely in Hong Kong. We get multiple establishing shots, see the trio visiting temples, and go on boat rides. It makes me wonder why the show decided to pick Hong Kong for this special finale. I couldn't find a concrete answer, but I'm guessing it had to do with how popular Hong Kong films were becoming. Chinese cinema was blowing up in the 70s, and Toei's Spider-Man was a massive success in Japan. so maybe the showrunners wanted to appeal to the East by setting the finale in Hong Kong, which honestly was a good idea. Spider-Man being out of his natural environment can be fun to watch, if done correctly. Cider figures out Peter's plan and has Den kidnapped. Despite having direct orders to kill him, Clyde procrastinates. Seriously, this has gotta be the worst hitman I've ever seen. During one of his rescue attempts, Spidey gets hit by a poison dart. Thankfully, Emily was there and took him to a nearby doctor. In order to cure him, the doctor has to unmask Spider-Man, revealing his secret identity to Emily. I know they already did this with the coin collector, but it didn't have any impact compared to this. Although when you think about it, it's kinda disappointing they're using a character we just met instead of the other main characters. But at this point, I'll take what I can get. For some reason, Clyde decides to bring Den to Cider's office, which leads to the craziest stunt of the entire show. God bless Fred for his bravery. You know he didn't get paid enough for this. Spider-Man beats Cider and was able to clear Min's name. As Den and Peter prepare to fly back home, Emily decides to stay to learn more about her heritage.
Yeah, I can understand that. But I'll miss you.
Pan American flight number 2 for San Francisco, now boarding at gate 14.
Will you ever come back to Hong Kong?
Well, I have a reason to now. Go Winyo, Ge Dakne. Did I say that all right?
Yes, perfectly. I shall always remember you, too.
Final call, please, for Pan American Airlines, flight number 2 departing for San Francisco.
So what happened? Were the numbers for season 2 lower than 1? Did Nicholas Hammond want to quit? Well, believe it or not, CBS actually chose to cancel it due to the fear of being perceived as a superhero network. Which may sound crazy to us now since we all grew up with the CW, Netflix, and ABC superhero shows, but back then superhero media was silly and pointless to Hollywood. Plus, CBS still had The Incredible Hulk, Wonder Woman, and were experimenting with Captain America and Doctor Strange, so they already had other projects to work on. Interesting enough, there was a reunion being worked on by Nicholas Hammond and Bill Bixby. Around the 80s, the two stars planned for a black-suited Spider-Man to team up with the Incredible Hulk. Hammond not only wanted Spidey to be more humorous, but he wanted to do some of the stunts himself. Bill Bixby was going to direct it, while Hammond would have written it with Stan Lee. But due to Universal Studios owning the rights to Hulk, they brushed the project off and allegedly lied to everyone about Lou Ferrigno's availability. And thus the reunion never happened. Maybe in another universe, but sadly not this one. Spider-Man 1977 is a product of its time. The action, pacing, and storytelling is slow, and the lack of recognizable characters can be annoying, but there is still an undeniable charm to the show. I appreciate the efforts Fred went through in order to bring Spider-Man to life. Nicholas Hammond nailed it as Peter Parker, and is the perfect representation of what Peter was like in the 70s. And all the other actors did a great job as well. While Stan Lee may have not liked it, I think Steve Ditko would. While modern day audiences will have a hard time liking this, there are fans like us who enjoy watching old media and listening to groovy music. Although watching this show in its original format may be impossible since it was only released on VHS, and each one has 2 random episodes. But thanks to dedicated fans, you can watch most of it on YouTube, although most of the episodes won't be higher than 480p. There are some people trying to remaster it to 4K, but most of them are still working on the pilots. With how expensive superhero shows are now, I highly doubt we'll ever get another live-action Spider-Man show. I'm fine with animation, since you can achieve more Spidey stuff than live action could. And live action is better suited for the movies since the budget will accommodate for the use of CGI, and we won't be stuck in a school or office for 22 episodes. Spider-Man 1977 could have worked if it wasn't for the creative limitations that held it back. But despite this, we can always look back and appreciate it for what it is. A fun and cheesy 70s Spider-Man show that doesn't have a giant robot. But that's a video for another day because I gotta talk about that new Spider-Man show, which I'm very worried about.
Deuces! Parker out.